This next section is going to be about personhood. So what we do now is we go into some applied issues in philosophy, and we look at things such as the characteristics of personhood. There's several listed, but we have 8. We'll be going into 8 of those characteristics, which would be embodiment, network of beliefs, rationality, social relations, self-awareness, language, reflection, autonomy, and rights, and that would be the bulk of today's lecture. And then we have to tackle the question of what is a person, what is an actual person, what do we mean when we say a person? Is it different from a human being? Which then leads to more questions such as, are all persons human beings? And vice versa, are all human beings persons? We look at the idea of non-human animals and machines, and whether, if they have the characteristics of personhood, this can be seen as proof of them being persons. For instance, if you decide that, for example, rationality and language and perhaps social relationships are sufficient for you to be a person, what if you have an animal or a machine who has these, or at least shows signs of these? Do you then consider it to be a person? If you consider it to be a person, then you have to make room for rights, but likewise for responsibilities. So if a machine, if a robot vacuum, to give a silly example, if a robot vacuum does something wrong, what do you do? Do you punish it? Do you put it in prison? So there are questions there. Of course, a robot vacuum, there's a limited amount of damage it can do, but what about self-driving cars? What about drones that have an active part to play in a war, for instance? Then we will be looking at theories about what constitutes personal identity through time, as as one might sort of reflect a bit. We get this even in popular parlance and how we usually speak to each other. I was a different person back then. Or you're really young and you think about you turning 90 and you think, but I'll be a different person by the time I'm 90. So somehow we think that time sort of changes us and changes who we are, and you see someone, you haven't met them in a while, and they've you're no longer the same person I knew 10 years ago. At the same time, you're talking to the same person, otherwise you wouldn't address them as you are no longer the same person I knew 10 years ago. So somehow there is this personal identity that sticks, no, regardless of how much we change. It somehow, we're still the same beings, essentially. And we will look at 3 main theories. First, we will look at Locke's, what we call Locke's memory theory, and that would be a psychological theory of personal identity. And then we will also look at the animal theory and the brain theory, which would be counted as physical continuity theories, what we call physical continuity theories, because the body is the same, therefore the person is the same, even if the person has changed substantially. There was a case back in the late 19th century, if I'm not mistaken, or sometime in the 19th century, where a railroad worker was struck by an iron rod through his skull. It caused massive damage, and the personality changed. Absolutely changed. So in a way you could say that this is no longer the same person you had before, because of physical damage. So in that case, since you have a substantially altered brain, can you say that this is a case of physical non-continuity? These are some of the issues that we will be tackling in this section over the next few lectures. And first of all, let's look a bit at sort of the characteristics of personhood. When we talk of a person, we're talking of an individual whom we usually consider to have certain traits. There are certain things that we think are important to label someone a person. Traditionally, historically, we used to think, or at least in the West, at least even in other areas, but predominantly in the Christian West, there was this tradition of thinking of persons as being beings with a soul. And this, of course, had a religious foundation to it. Religion speaks a lot about having a soul, and the soul transcends the body, so somehow you have a separation of the body and the mind, of the physical and the spiritual. And until the late 19th century, or even the mid 19th century, until the 19th century, the soul was taken to be for granted. Now, with advancements of the scientific revolution and the different discoveries that were made, the Copernican revolution, and you have the theory of evolution as discovered by, as developed by Darwin, by Charles Darwin, and then the development of Nietzsche and the different diverse shifts in the social structures of the communities. You had this shift, therefore, from a predominantly religious Europe to an increasingly secular Europe, and an increasingly atheistic explanation of the cosmos. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the people behind these explanations were atheists themselves, but the explanations themselves, how does the body work, how does the universe work, what is our place in the universe, they became increasingly atheistic in the sense that God wasn't used as an explanation, as a reason, or a cause for how the world works, or for how we work, or for what we are. With the death of God, which we covered with Nietzsche, with the death of God, you have, therefore, the collapse of the whole edifice of religious explanations. Therefore, God was, in Aristotelian parlance, we would say that God was the efficient cause, the maker of us. So why do we exist? Because God made us. But God was also the final cause, the sort of the telos. Why do we exist? Why are we here? Because we want eventually to join God in the eternal light of afterlife. And Nietzsche criticizes this, and he explains that Christianity developed on the view of the world as something which is quite beastly, as in the world itself is quite savage, which he doesn't refute. Nietzsche plays along with this, but then what Christianity does is, instead of facing it and embracing that savageness, that wildness to cosmos as is, instead of embracing that, Christianity then goes somewhere else. It goes into denial mode and invents an afterlife. And this afterlife pays for whatever hurts, whatever disappointments we go through this life by giving us a consolation prize at the end. Now, the only way to get to a life after life, your body clearly is gone, but somehow you need to move on, you need to voyage towards that afterlife. And the way to do that is by inventing a soul, by creating a soul, by making a soul, by giving us a new concept called the everlasting soul that survives the death of the body. So, what makes a person? Well, if we take this narrative that what fulfills us, what makes us whole, what defines us as human beings, is this specialty that we were made in God's image, and therefore we should aspire to join God after death, which is the real life. Then it makes sense to say that, well, a person is someone with a soul, and the soul is defined thus: something that transcends the body and then can enjoy eternal glory. That's one side to it. Once you shift sideways, then the soul, this idea of the soul, then you have to revise, you have to reopen the question of what makes a person a person. The soul is out of the window. So there have been several attempts at naming characteristics that are not the soul, but that somehow we can use to explain what makes us persons, or what makes a person a person. And we no longer assert that we possess souls. Sometimes you can have people who still claim that souls exist, but this is not just a matter of dogma. Even for a believer, for someone who believes in say, for someone who's a Christian or from any other religion, we have to also to realize, to recognize that we are living in an increasingly secular society. Therefore, we need to find perhaps more scientifically inclined explanations, because that is the zeitgeist as well. Sometimes we think that we can practice philosophy in a vacuum, right? Philosophy as an exercise of the mind that is separate and disconnected from whatever is happening in society and in this place we have in history and the cultures we're in. I don't ascribe much to that. I think we're very much situated, and the way we think is very much a product of its time. And therefore, if we want to address issues, philosophical issues, we have to address them in their context. Now, what constitutes a human being as a person, therefore? So, personhood, if we had to define it, would be the status of being a person. Personhood. Status of being a person. And this concept, this idea rather, of being a person, then how we define that term has influence on several fields, on ethics, for instance, on ethics when it comes to justice, legal justice, social justice, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to medical procedures, there's euthanasia we can think of, there's abortion, there is animal rights, and eventually we will get to a point where it's not a question of why, I think, and this is and just an opinion, but it's not a question of why, it's a question of when will we be discussing the rights of machines. Could be in 10 years, could be in 10,000 years, but eventually I think we will get to a point where it will be discussed. Is this thing a person? So the concept of personhood is quite important in different fields. There's various characteristics we'll be going through, and I've mentioned them at the beginning. Let's look at the very first, which would be embodiment. So, what does embodiment mean? Essentially, it simply means one who is embodied, who has a body. So, embodiment of a person. So, this, in the sense, if we say that a person must be embodied, then we're saying that a person, something or someone, an entity who has personhood, has to also have a body. And this is interesting because it opens some doors but also closes some others. Let's say you think of persons. For you to be a person, you need to have a body. If you're dead, you don't have a person. Therefore, you don't have a body. Therefore, you can't be called a person. So souls and ghosts and stuff like this and angels can't be called persons. No, so this can be seen a bit as an attack on religious belief. On the other hand, there's the implication that if a person needs a body, then if you get to a point where you develop a sort of software, and this software is advanced enough, this program is advanced enough to have sort of to be say, but this is really intelligent. Imagine ChatGPT, right? And even the latest versions of these language platforms, these language software, generative language things, regardless of how human-like they seem to us, but there are ways and means, and you can tell after using them for a while that this is actually this is a machine, right? It's not a person. It's clever, but at the same time it's quite stupid in certain areas as well. But give it, I don't know, 5,000 years of advancements, and God knows where we'll end. You know, how incredibly mimicking, how incredibly it will mimic our behavior, at which point we will not be able to distinguish between them and us, and therefore we start thinking this is a person. If you ascribe, you do a Turing test, based on Alan Turing's idea that if it acts like a person, then it is a person. If it cheats you into thinking that this is a person, then you should consider it to be a person. That's the Turing test, and we'll be going into it further down the line. The implication of embodiment is that if you have something like that far into the future, perhaps yes, it is self-aware and it has emotional intelligence as well. Who knows? But it doesn't quite have a body. Now, would that make it not a person? Would that exclude it from being a person since it doesn't have a body? That is one of the things that come up. Now, of course, one might argue that, but listen, this has CPUs and it has RAM, and who knows in 5,000 years where IT will end up, what sort of space age technology we will have developed by then, hardware, but somehow for software to run, you need a hardware infrastructure. But bear with me for a minute. Imagine that this hardware, yes, okay, it's the brain, right? But it's a brain that is not just running one person, but several persons on it. And it seems like it has a body but doesn't quite have a body. It doesn't have a body the way we understand. And if it doesn't have a body the way we understand, then it can be argued that it doesn't quite have a body. And this is something that it's a fallacy that we can fall in, right? It's called the homocentric fallacy, where we think that unless things look like us, then they somehow lack something. This has been happening for centuries. When Descartes looked at animals, looked at dogs if I'm not mistaken, and for some reason he didn't think twice about kicking a dog. There's nothing wrong with kicking a dog. Why? Because a dog just acts as if it's in pain. It squeals or whatever, but it's not really in pain, so it's okay. You can hurt the dog. Nowadays, we feel really uncomfortable with something like that. So this is always developing the way we see others. Now, going back to embodiment. So imagine to stick to the idea of having sort of like a character, a person in the machine. Imagine you have a video game, right? And this thing in the video game can obviously run and jump and fight and lose lives and come back to life and interact with the world that they're in. You have puzzles to solve, and they can fly, they can jump. More or less what we do. Of course, there are some things we can't do, but like some things they do that we can't, like jumping off the roof of buildings and surviving. But at the same time, there's things that we can do and they can't. We can taste strawberries, as one would assume a video game character can't taste strawberries. We can run our hand on rough surfaces and feel the difference between that and running our hands through water. A video game character can't really do that. It seems that they're doing it, but what it's like to feel that roughness or that wetness is something you can get from the 3D world we inhabit rather than the 3D world a computer program inhabits. So you have, therefore, characters in a video game that do all these things, do go through these actions, but these actions seem to be happening on the screen only. Now, think about yourselves. You can run, you can jump, you can do all sorts of things, but you do them in the real world. You don't just do them on a screen. That's because you have a body. And you inhabit, therefore, a physical form that allows you to move around, to interact with things and experience the world through senses like touch, which we've mentioned, sight, smell and taste, etc. So this is what we mean by embodiment. Having a physical body that lets you be part of the world. So when we talk about personhood and we mention embodiment, we're saying that being a person involves having a body that allows you to experience life and the world around you. It's like the difference, in a sense, between being a character in a video game or being a thinking thing in some future chat GPT-ish thingy, and being a player who's actually living and breathing in the real world. I'm going to move on and discuss the second characteristic of personhood, and this would be having a network of beliefs. Now, having a network of beliefs means that we, first of all, are situated beings. We inhabit both a specific space, since we're embodied, right? We have a body that lives somewhere, and a specific time, but usually inhabit our own lifetime. So we live where and we live when. Having beliefs means that we perceive the world in some particular way. Harking back to Nietzsche once again, when we discuss Nietzsche, we mentioned perspectivism, the fact that we are all somehow situated with certain perspectives. We have different perspectives, all of us, and that's because we inhabit a specific space, a specific time. Even your closest neighbor inhabits a different space, perhaps even a different time, but that means that each of us has a unique perspective on things. Therefore, having unique perspectives means we perceive the world in different particular ways. We have a unique position with a unique worldview. Each of us has this. We are also capable, we have the capability of forming multiple beliefs, which often connect with other beliefs that we hold. Let me give you an example. So imagine you have a belief that a pencil, a working pencil, writes on paper. Let's say that that is your belief. I would call it knowledge actually, but let's say it's a belief. Anyways, taking Plato's definition of knowledge, a knowledge is also a belief. It's a form of belief. It would be justified true belief according to Plato. So knowledges are beliefs, if that makes sense. Let's say, therefore, you hold the belief that a pencil writes on paper. How do you know it's a pencil? Because you use it to write on a sheet of paper and it leaves a mark. Therefore, you have an idea of what a pencil is, and you have the concept of a pencil in your head when you describe a pencil. If someone shows you a paper clip and you imagine you ask for a pencil, do you have a pencil? And someone shows you a paper clip. There you go. But it's not a pencil, it's a paper clip. How do you know? Because you hold beliefs about what a pencil is, and you also hold beliefs about what a pencil is not. Apart from beliefs about what other things are, like a paperclip, you know what a paperclip is. Therefore, you have your own beliefs of what a paperclip should be like or what it should do. And we hold so many of these beliefs, and they're connected. You have an apple, a rubber, a guitar, a window. None of these are pencils. Therefore, if someone shows you a rubber, shows you a window, and you ask for a pencil, you go, but that's a window, it's not a pencil. What do you mean? Are you okay? Because our beliefs about the world are connected in this sense. You know what something is, along knowing also what other things are. We're discussing pencils, but this can go for other people. You know your mother because you know who your mother is not, for instance, or you know who is not your mother, rather. You know your partner, your children, the president of wherever. But wow, because you also know what that person is not. but also you have, which would be called an apophatic knowledge, but you also know on top of that, so that's already a belief, but on top of that you also have beliefs, positive knowledge about other things. All these knowledges, so to speak, all these beliefs form a network between them. We can call, we can attribute this network of beliefs to us being a person. This sum of beliefs together would be one of the characteristics that we have. We have, like I've explained, we have several beliefs, and once you connect them together, once you bring them together, once you develop new beliefs, right? You've been taught since childhood that something with a ballpoint is a pencil. And then, as you proceed through life, you get corrected by the teachers, you get laughed at by your fellow students, right? And they teach you that actually that's not a pencil. This would be a pencil with the point that breaks and you have to sharpen it. And this also is part of this network of beliefs. It's not a fixed web, it's a web that grows a bit. It's a network that grows and changes. Sometimes you break parts of it, sometimes you fix those parts and you break somewhere else, and then you fix that and perhaps make it bigger, make it larger. This would be how we sort of behave, so how we act, and how we get defined as human beings. So the network of beliefs isn't just about what we know, it's also about how all those ideas fit together, and these leave their mark. They influence what we feel, what we think, and what we do. Going to move on and discuss now everybody's favorite, rationality. Aristotle tells us man is a rational animal. Aristotle defines us, therefore, as being rational, right? It's what makes us us, rationality. Of course, there are other things he says about us, right? About being social animals, for instance. But rationality plays a huge part in human, in personhood, in being a person. So, first of all, what is rationality? It's the ability to use logic and reasoning when we want to argue, when we want to make our case, when we want to discover the truth with a capital T. We use our mental faculties, usually labeled as rationality. Plato, in his tripartite theory of the soul, attributes rationality to humans. If you remember, Plato calls our minds as having three parts, which he for which he gives us also the allegory of the charioteer with the two horses, the black horse and the white horse. And the the charioteer is the rational part of the brain, is the one who should be driving. But rationality on its own doesn't move, it needs to be dragged by the passions. And still, even though rationality on its own doesn't move, it still holds the driving seat. So rationality comes, sort of, there is a hierarchy in a sense. Aristotle similarly when discussing the soul, when discussing morality in the Nicomachean Ethics, he says that people possess a rational principle, therefore that people are rational, and it's beyond that shared nutrition with plants and animals, or instincts with plants. When we discuss the souls and we discuss Aristotle, we see that every type of being, whether you're a plant or you are an animal, non-human, or if you're a human being, all three tiers have their own characteristics. Their soul is made by having distinct characteristics. Plants are nutritive, animals are instinctive or instinctual, human beings are rational. Aristotle argues that this is what this sets us apart, this is what defines us. But defining rationality can be quite challenging. I tried at the beginning, I said that it can be described as our ability to apply reason and logic. We can also categorize rationality into three types. One would be the basic rationality, so that would be to draw conclusions between beliefs. We can use different beliefs to arrive at a conclusion. That would be basic rationality. We do this based on evidence and reasoning. Then there is the means end rationality. It's different from basic rationality. Means end means that it's about using beliefs and using desires in actions. I'm thirsty. I'd like some water. I use my rationality to navigate the world to find that water. In my case, it would be a walk to the cupboard. In the case of someone living on the plains of Africa during drought, it would be to find an oasis, say. But that would be means end rationality. And the third way of thinking about rationality would be empathy, what we call sometimes imagination rationality. And this would be an ability that we have as rational beings to evaluate our beliefs, to evaluate our desires, and imagine being in someone else's shoes. That is what empathy is about. Putting yourself, placing yourself in someone else's circumstances. Through what? Through the power of imagination, we have this ability to think as if we were someone else. We have no proof, as far as I know, but we have no conclusive proof. Other types of life can do this, or at least to the complexity that we do it. We know that we do it, but when it comes to other animals, perhaps there have been experiments showing that higher order animals are capable of doing this to a limited extent, but to the complexity that we manage to do this, the advanced planning that we manage to do when it comes to this, the advanced imagination, people we've never met, circumstances that are far in the future or far back in history, we are still able to somehow do that imaginative exercise. We call this counterfactual imagination. It goes counter to the facts. Counterfactual goes against the facts. Against the facts, not because it fights with the facts, but because the facts are one way. We are able to imagine things that are not the facts. I had a bad day. I think, if only I didn't do that. Well, that's already counterfactual imagination. I'm imagining me doing something I did not do. Counterfactual imagination. And that is just one side of imagination. But again, being, imagine putting yourself in someone else's shoes, having empathy is counterfactual as well, because it's not you. You're doing, you're imagining something that is not the fact. You are not someone else, and yet you're still able to do it. And that would be the empathy rationality, what we can call empathy rationality. And we have beliefs, and being rational means that we can find good reasons for holding those beliefs. We can rationalize our beliefs. Let's say you believe it's going to rain tomorrow, and you believe this because you saw a weather forecast, say, or you notice the dark clouds in the sky and you think, but these are all signs of bad weather tomorrow. That would be rational because you have evidence. But if you believe it will rain simply because you want it to, I really want it to rain tomorrow, therefore it will rain, that's a fallacy, first of all. You don't have any evidence, but it's also not very rational. No, no. Sometimes it happens that we meet people like this in life. They believe that through the power of wanting, things will actually happen. Now, in some cases, yes, but in most cases, no. You can't cure cancer simply by wishing it away. Likewise, you can't win the lottery simply by wishing it. If you don't buy a ticket, you don't even stand a chance of it. So regardless of how strongly you wish to win the lottery, unless you buy the ticket or someone gives you it, or you steal it, you won't win the actual thing. It's a bit like believing someone took the cookie just because you didn't like them. And this happens often, right? We sort of in our head, sometimes we accuse people of doing things, but we don't have quite the proof for it. It's a form of ad hominem fallacy, which we cover when we do logic, right? But once again, it's irrational. We're basing things without proof. We accuse someone just because we don't like them. He must have stolen my phone. My phone's missing, therefore he or she must have took it. And then you discover you left your phone in the car or wherever. Anyway, so rationality is about thinking clearly, asking questions, looking for evidence, and you don't just believe things because you want them to be true. It's a bit like being a detective, really. Being a detective means usually being rational, being able to analyze things rationally. Moving on to social relationships. Aristotle keeps returning, right? Keeps leaving a mark in our philosophical enterprise that we have here. And we've mentioned man is a rational animal. He's also saying that man is a social animal. So essentially, he's claiming that human beings are inherently social beings. If we're self-aware, it also perhaps means that we recognize the distinction between ourselves and the others, what we call the others, other people, or at least between me and the world out there that is not me. We're already therefore drawing this distinction between me and the others. Now, of course, we also recognize other people there in the world, and we grow a sense of self also through our understanding of others. And once we start this process of getting to know ourselves and getting to know others, one sort of strengthens the other. The more I learn about other people, perhaps, the more I can learn about myself, because I can see what other people do, and hopefully, if I'm open for it, of course, it's not necessarily so, but if I'm open for, if I approach it in a mature way, I can also form ideas about me. We continuously form and evolve relationships throughout our lives, and sometimes we end old ones, we form new ones, but this is very much part of who we are. Human beings happen to be social creatures, and so far persons by and large have been defined as human beings. But if what makes a human being is being a social animal, being a person also gets dragged in. Being a person is being a social animal. And like I said, Aristotle defines us as social and political animals. Rousseau also argued that if we remain isolated, we remain unfulfilled. We need to be social to develop as mature, to grow as human beings, to find fulfillment. The more we interact with others, Nietzsche, like I mentioned already, Nietzsche held that when we adopt different perspectives, we widen our horizons, we understand the world better. It doesn't necessarily mean we will get the actual truth of things, what sometimes is called the noumena. Husserl especially mentions the noumena and the phenomena. Doesn't mean we'll get to the noumena or to the forms of Plato, but the more we expose ourselves to other people's perspectives, the more we grow, the higher the chances are that we better understand reality. Likewise, the more we interact with different people, whoever they are, the more we can help ourselves shape our thoughts, our feelings, even our beliefs. Let's move on and discuss language now. This is the fifth one we are doing, and just to quickly remind you, we did embodiment, we did network of beliefs, we mentioned rationality, we mentioned social relations so far. Now let's discuss language. And the philosophy of language and the exploration of language, the examination of language, goes back long way to ancient times. You have Plato, who in the Cratylus questioned whether the names of things were natural or conventional. And this is an interesting question that we will be visiting when we do the philosophy of language. But essentially it's questioning whether names are ingrained in things. The whole side, the whole discipline of philology is tied to this, even linguistics in a sense. Whether things have their names inbuilt or whether it is by convention. We agree to call that a dog. Anyways, the philosophy of language, therefore, has quite a history. And you have Aristotle and the Stoics, for instance, who explored logic, which again is part of language. When we study logic, we're studying how language works, we're studying how knowledge works, but also studying language at the end of the day. We had people like Aristotle and the Stoics exploring how we create meaning, how words get to have one meaning and not another. There's the examination of grammar. And then more recently, you have names, huge names like Frege, like Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein, de Saussure. We'll be covering a lot of these in this course, who've also focused on language. But why are we so fascinated with language? Why is it that language seems to be ascribed to people? Can you have a person without linguistic ability? Can you have a rational being without linguistic ability? Can you reason the way you do if you didn't have words? Can you have a society that functions the way it does if you didn't have words? Because language seems to facilitate communication between individuals. Language seems to facilitate rationality. If I tell you what is the answer of 1248 minus 76, you can easily find the answer. How? Through logic. But if you don't have these concepts of 1276, if you don't know what those words mean, it's such an abstract number that you can't imagine it. If I tell you, imagine 3, you can imagine 3 in your mind's eye. Imagine 1, you can imagine 1, right? If I ask you, imagine 9, it's already starting to get a bit difficult to imagine 9. Imagine 2420. Now that's impossible. Your mind can't possibly do that. So the way we deal with that is by using language. And therefore, rationality seems to depend on language. Remember that mathematics, is essentially a rational discipline. And when we study logic, again, it is a rational discipline. But without language, all these things fall down. Furthermore, we need language because we need to communicate with others. Now, likewise, one can say that we've acquired language because we're able to communicate. So this can be seen a bit like a chicken and egg sort of thing. Which came first, language or communication, the need to communicate? It's arguable which way it goes. It's debatable which way it goes. But either way, you need both. And for society to stick, you need to communicate. Now, one could argue, but imagine you have imagine you have a community of who have speech, a community of people who have speech impediments, severe speech, who are mutes essentially. Can't they be called a community? Yes, but it's not, doesn't mean that there's no language there. If you have sign language, it's still language. We're talking about the ability to use your tongue and, I don't know, the throat and the lips here specifically, although that comes in quite handy if you want to communicate. But it's language in general. The fact you can type. Most of us nowadays communicate through text, written texts. You don't use your mouth as such, and yet you are communicating linguistically. If you're reading Braille, you are still communicating through language. So language as such seems to be foundational to us, therefore having rationality, to us being social, and a number of other things. We see, we notice non-human animals using signs to communicate. You have birds using sounds, and you have gestures happening. These can be called signals. No, when I use language, if I ask, pass me the paperclip, please. Well, I'm using signs. The word paperclip is a sign for the thing one thinks. Right. So pass me. The word pass me. It refers is a sort of like a signal for an action, to take an object and give it to me. So likewise, you can have signals happening in non-human animals, but even though they are signals, a bee is striped yellow and black. That's a signal that it's a dangerous thing. Do not play with it. A wasp, say, or one of these hornet thingies. And people find it absolutely terrifying, but it has a signal painted on its back, or whatever, on its abdomen and thorax, I believe. Those yellow and brown, or yellow and black, or yellow and red, those are a sign not to mess too much with this thing. It's telling you, stay away or I will hurt you. But that doesn't necessarily qualify as a language. These are inherited through instinct. Now this is a key distinction between language and other signals. So a stop sign, it seems not to say much. What is a stop sign? It's a white stripe on a red background. What does the pattern on a hornet look like? It's yellow stripes on a red background. They don't seem to be too different in terms of perhaps structure, but the foundational difference is that the hornet's body has been inherited through genetics and through, perhaps when it comes to behavior, not the colors now, how they behave, it's inherited through instinct. Whereas a stop sign, as minimalistic as it is, it's not something that's inherited through instinct or something passed on through genetics. It's arbitrary. We've agreed that a red circle with a white bar means don't come in. So in that case, we can distinguish between the hornet's body that is it's an important signal, but at the end of the day, it's a signal, not a language. Whereas the stop sign is a form of language. Sorry, it is an example of language being used. So we can see this distinction, therefore, between signals, simple signals, and signals that are part of language. Language would be structured. It would have conventional methods of communication. It's a complex system that has been developed and used by a specific groups of people. If you had to leave your home place, travel somewhere foreign, find people whose language you haven't ever spoken before, you'll have quite some trouble communicating in your native tongue. No one will understand you. Likewise, you will not be able to understand others. If you're German, never been exposed to Chinese, and you go to China, you won't be able to understand what they're saying. Likewise, then for you, if they've never been exposed to German. Any two places can be mentioned: Italy and Ethiopia and I don't know, the Maori peoples. So again, language has to be developed, it has to be nurtured. It's a conventional method of communication used by a specific people, You're not born knowing how to communicate in your parents' or your community's language. They have to teach you. If they don't teach you, you will not get it. Or if at least you don't pursue learning in that language, you won't get it. So while we may have an inherent ability to acquire a language, a spider doesn't have an inherent ability to speak Maltese or English or Italian or Spanish. On the other hand, a human baby, wherever this baby is born, has an inherent ability to learn, to acquire languages. But then, knowledge of a particular language. So we're going from language as a concept, right? Conceptually, every human baby should, at least in theory, be able to acquire any human language as long as they're taught it. But knowledge of a particular language, then you're a Chinese baby born in China and you're learning Mandarin because of your family. Knowledge of that particular language, that particular Mandarin, Chinese Mandarin, that's a skill that is developed, it is nurtured, it's acquired. Language, in conclusion, considerably expands our ability to reason and to think about things beyond the present. It allows us to label concepts and communicate things in space and conditional information. If it rains next week, you can take the white umbrella if it's available. Otherwise, you can borrow my brother Tony's raincoat. Imagine explaining that to someone who doesn't have language, who lacks language. We are able to say these complexities. To be fair, it sounds pretty simple as a statement. No, if that done, okay, it's a conditional statement. But it's very complex at the same time. Trying to explaining that to a dog, you will never arrive. Because they lack this complexity that we have. Anyways, so language is one of the characteristics of being a person. Now, moving on, we'll be tackling self-awareness. And with self-awareness, especially in the context of personhood, especially in the context of beliefs, it's a bit like having a mental mirror, holding a mirror to you. Imagine you have a mirror and it doesn't just show your face, but it's a bit of a magic mirror, like the mirror of Adriel, what was it called anyway, or Arusel, that mirror from Harry Potter, where they have this mirror and it reflects their hidden desires and dreams and what have you. So imagine having a mirror just like that, or very similar to that, and this mirror shows you the body, but it also reflects your mind. Now, if it reflects your mind, it's going to reflect your thoughts, your beliefs, your dreams, your hopes. And by being able to look at this reflection, you're then able to see your own thoughts and understand, hopefully, why you think the way that you do. Imagine you have this belief that dogs are the best pets, and you hold that belief, you don't really question it. But why? Because I like them. Okay, but why? Because dogs have this, I don't know, they always welcome you home and they guard you and they protect you, right? being able to be self-aware is what allows us to reflect on why we think dogs are the best pets. We're able to think about ourselves, thinking about other things. It's a bit meta, I know. But by being self aware, we're able to somehow, it's like having an out of body experience, right? Something you read about either in science fiction or religious texts. It's like being able to detach yourself from your body and looking from the outside in. And therefore, by doing this, we're able to see why we think the way that we do. Going back to the dog, right? Believe that dogs are the best pets. I mean, maybe it's because you grew up with a dog. Maybe you love how friendly they are, how playful they are. So, in a sense, self-awareness would be like having a conversation with yourself, like talking to yourself, asking, but why do I think this? Why do I hold this belief? How come? How come I have these thoughts? How did I come to this belief? Therefore, when you're self-aware about your beliefs, you also start to understand what other people might think. You're aware also, you grow this awareness that other people have or might have different views. So now you see that one is connected to the other. Right? If you have self-awareness, you somehow you grow social awareness as well. You're aware of yourself. But this is why earlier I said that being self-aware is not the same as being aware of other people, but at the same time it's very closely linked. You develop one by growing the other. Back to the dog example, right? You think dogs are the best pets, but then you might see other people who think or who might prefer cats, and that's all right. Self-awareness helps us realize that our beliefs are just one way of seeing the world. We realize that there are many other ways too of seeing the world. It's like having a map. You are aware of your own map of the world, but also then you understand that everyone else has their own map. Or imagine playing a game of Monopoly. It's the same board, we're navigating the same space, perhaps, but your shoe piece is not the same as the top hat piece your friend has. You're navigating perhaps the same space, but you have different possessions, you have different minds, you have different identities, you're different people. And being aware that you are a shoe or a boat, in a sense, includes you being aware that your friend is not you, that your friend is a top hat, not a shoe or a boat. So that would be self-awareness. Moving on, we have reflection, and reflection stems from self-awareness. It sort of springs out of self-awareness. It's the ability to introspect about our beliefs, our feelings, our experiences. Reflection, introspection, is an ability to think about these things, and in the process of doing this we gain insights. Reflection also means that we can reflect on other people's experiences, other people's feelings. So again, it's a way for us to put ourselves in other people's shoes. Again, you see how this then links up to a network of beliefs. Um, Reflection. By reflecting, we can make sense of what we believe, of our beliefs. One of the things Nietzsche teaches us, even if you disagree with Nietzsche, but he tries to teach us, and eventually even Sartre, which we, both of whom we cover. Nietzsche talks about becoming an Übermensch, right? But you become an Übermensch also by reflecting. You gain master morality by being able to reflect on your choices, etc. Likewise, Sartre, when he talks of existence preceding essence, he is very much talking about this. When he says that we make our essence also through reflection, through thinking about whom we are, where we want to get, what we want to become, and by reflecting on our beliefs, we can decide if they really make sense to us and fit who we are or who we want to be. Of course, this also assumes we are autonomous beings. We are rational agents as well as moral agents. Therefore, that would be reflection. And moving on and getting towards the end of this, let's talk a bit about autonomy. Now, autonomy is the ability to act without outside influence, without having someone else pushing you, or without having someone else make you do things. Autonomy is about being a master. Again, using Nietzschean phrasing, but autonomy is about being in control of your own destiny, let's call it. I'm wary of the term because it implies things I wouldn't like to imply, but the idea of fate in your hands and destiny in your hands. Well, if you are autonomous, there's no such thing as destiny. There's no such thing as fate. That's something that you can control. You make your own fate, it's fine. But someone else making your own fate, that's not fine. Autonomy means having the freedom and the ability to choose your own beliefs, to choose your own opinions. It's like being able to choose whether you would like a chocolate ice cream and a strawberry ice cream. If you really have that choice, you're standing in front of the ice cream stall, and then the guy goes like, "What would you like, strawberry or ice? Strawberry or chocolate?" And you go, "I'd like strawberry, thank you very much." And then they give you the strawberry one. That is quite different from going in front of the of the ice cream stand with your mom, and the ice cream guy tells you, "Okay, what would you like, a strawberry or a chocolate?" And your mom goes, "Oh, shush." He will take the vanilla one. I'd be upset. But why would I be upset? Because I feel possibly like my autonomy is being undermined. Like my freedom and ability to choose according to my wishes, according to my opinions or beliefs, maybe to hold beliefs with regards to ice cream flavors when you're 5 years old is a bit of a stretch. But this is something we're constantly facing throughout life. From the first moments we start to form ideas to the very last moments, one would assume, of our lives. This sense of autonomy is to be seen as foundational, once again, foundational to being a person, to be called a person. This is recognized as a basic human right as well. Human rights being about the rights of persons, right? Human persons, fair enough, they don't talk about animal rights as such, the basic human rights. but they talk about human rights. But at the same time, it is the rights of persons, whether they be human or non-human animals or other machines. If we agree, if we get to the point where we agree that that this thing that is not human is a person, then we have to accept that this thing has autonomy. It can decide according to its own ideas. It can make up its own mind. That's a very important concept. It's a very important concept. Autonomy is about being able to decide for yourself, making up your own mind. And we've discussed determinism in a past lecture. Determinism, in a sense, hard determinism flushes out autonomy. It tells us we do not have autonomy. We think we have a say, we think we're choosing, but we're not really. We're determined by exterior influences. Therefore, the flip side to determinism is that we are not autonomous. But the implication there is that if we're not autonomous, we can't be called persons. We can't be really considered to be persons. If being a person, therefore, means being autonomous, once we take that autonomy away, we are left with not a person. I've mentioned Sartre already today. Let me mention him once again. But as Sartre said, existence precedes essence. Existence comes before essence. So first we exist, first we're, to use a Heideggerian term, first we're thrown in the world. We're not asked, would you like to be born? We never face a referendum about that, we never take a vote. The ayes, there's nay, no, we never go through that, right? We're thrown in the world. Whether we like it or not, we are born. And of course, following that, everything else comes, including this discussion we're having about what constitutes a person. But there is one moment we have no control over. That is the point of existence, coming into existence. So first we start to exist, tells us Sartre. But existing, just the fact that we exist, doesn't mean that we have an essence already. Doesn't mean that our destiny has been written already. So it was written, so it shall be done, whatever the quote from the Bible goes, and from Metallica. So you have existence that comes before finding who you are. First we exist, then through our choices and actions we define what sort of person we become. We can do that only through autonomy, by having moral autonomy, rational autonomy. You can do that only if you have free choice. Only if your choices are freely made. That reflects our autonomy. So this is called agency. In philosophy we call it agency. That is the ability to decide for yourself. And this agency is fundamental. It's foundational. This is a basic ability to shape ourselves, to decide who we want to be. It's what makes us, at the end of the day, responsible for our actions. If we do something good and we're clapped, well done, well done. Okay, we've earned that. Why? Because we have autonomy. But likewise, if we do something wrong, we do something bad, and people slap us in the face, what did you do? Why? See, we've also earned that, because if we think we are autonomous, if we accept we are autonomous, but take autonomy away, and you're left with nothing of this. You passed your incredibly difficult and exam, and you've worked hard for it. I don't tell you well done if I don't believe in autonomy. Why? Because you had no choice other than to pass. once you take out autonomy, that's what happens. Likewise, you've run over, hit and run a 4-year-old child. But I can't slap you, I can't take you to prison, I can't accuse you of doing something. Why? Because you didn't do it. Your body perhaps did, but you as a person didn't do it if you don't believe in autonomy. Because you were destined to do that. You were influenced by external things, external means to do what you did, so you can't be blamed for it. Life goes on, sadly, but anyways. So that is the implication of autonomy. Whether you keep it there or you take it out, if you keep it there, there are implications there. And there's responsibility. We have to face the fact that we have responsibilities that we owe. On the other hand, if you take it out, you are left with neither responsibilities nor rights, in a sense. No one owes you anything, which leads us to the 8th point, and that is Ubuntu rights. And like we said, therefore, our autonomy makes us moral agents. And by being moral agents, we mean that we're responsible for our choices. We respond quite differently to, say, a baby throwing food against the wall, and being in a restaurant and a 40-something in a business suit doing the same against the wall. We expect the adult, or for no reason, I'm saying, although I can't justify any rational being doing that. Anyway, so we expect the adult to have developed appropriate awareness and social skills. But on the other hand, our expectations for the baby are significantly lower. We don't have the same expectations. This accountability is fundamentally social. It's how we are supposed to act in society. Society is built on these expectations. You have laws, right? But then you have things like norms and etiquette, etc. These things sort of tell us what is expected of us. We expect, usually, people who've grown their autonomy. Why do I say grown their autonomy? Because you got, like I said, you can't expect a baby to have the same level of autonomy as a 5-year-old. You can't expect a 5-year-old to have the same autonomy as a 15-year-old, or a 15-year-old to a 50-year-old. But when we have developed this autonomy, this also makes us accountable in a social sense. And looking back at social contract theory, looking at it, what Rousseau had to say and Locke and Hobbes had to say, being members of a society means we are accountable to that society. You have duties, but also you have rights. And those rights should be guaranteed by having laws and regulations in society. These rights provide us with a claim to certain entitlements. By claiming we have a right to education, a right to owning property, a right to reproduce, a right to believe whatever we want to believe in terms of religion and even science, in a sense. But these rights recognize you as a person, and that is why when we talk of non-human, particularly now, because there's a discussion, non-human animals and other forms of entities that are not human beings, when we talk of perhaps recognizing them as people, then we have to keep in mind that we also need to look at things like the freedom of belief. Are they free to believe whatever they want? Well, if we want ChatGPT version 2500 to still give us what we wanted, to be reliable, then it can't have freedom of belief. If you ask ChatGPT, and hopefully ChatGPT gets to a point where it's more reliable than it is today. But if you ask ChatGPT future, if you ask it, listen, is the world round or flat? It can't have the freedom to believe that the world is a pyramid. So that has to be curtailed. Non-discrimination, expressions of belief, change of belief. Is it okay for something to change its beliefs? Randomly, one fine day it wakes up thinking that the earth is actually in the shape of a cloud. And then by the evening it is, oh no, I just had a rough night and this morning I really needed it to be a cloud. Well, I don't know how we deal with a tool like that. But then again, when we talk of things like this, entities like this, being tools, it seems to already exclude them from having personhood. Because, referring to Kant and the idea that we are ends in ourselves, we can't be seen as tools. What makes a person in Kantian terms is the fact that this thing, this being, calling a person a thing needs some justification, it seems, but calling someone or treating someone as a someone rather than as a something means treating them as ends in themselves. We don't usually treat robot vacuums and I don't know, smart TVs and remote war drones as beings in themselves, as ends in themselves. No, they're just tools. They're there to serve us. They're slaves in a sense for us. If we keep them in the slave state, it's really hard for them to become autonomous and therefore develop a master morality. A master mind frame, a mindset, let alone a master morality. So these are things to consider, right? These are characteristics we have as persons. The usefulness of such a discussion is that it helps us to better frame, to better understand issues around personhood, issues around calling others persons. It helps us to perhaps tackle things that I mentioned at the beginning. I've mentioned abortion, I've mentioned euthanasia, and even when I say abortion, there are two sides to it. It's not just the personhood of the new thing, it's the personhood of also the carrier, the woman, the person carrying this. The questions of autonomy are not just about the baby, it's the autonomy of the mother as well. Or of the being carrying the fetus. End of life, right? So we won't let you kill yourself because we think you're a person, therefore you being a person are sacred, therefore we won't let you kill yourself. But by not letting you kill yourself, now of course we're talking euthanasia, not just any suicide, right? Euthanasia has some very specific clauses tied to it that we tackle somewhere else when we discuss physician-assisted suicide. But if we are discussing end-of-life philosophy, end-of-life ethics, on the one hand I tell you, no, you're too precious, I can't let you do that. On the other hand, I'm telling you, well, I'm denying you, therefore I'm taking away your autonomy. I'm also dehumanizing you. I'm depersonifying you? No, not personify, because that means something else. Well, I'm taking away your personhood, in a sense, by taking away your autonomy, your right to choose. I'm taking your right to choose for yourself. So I'm hitting quite a number of those things. So in a sense, I'm keeping you there, but I'm taking away your personhood. These are some complex issues, although I think they're made more complex not because they are very complex, but because certain objections are very loud, therefore they seem to be stronger positions than they actually are. Anyways, this brings today's lecture to a close. Next time we will be looking at, give me just a second, we'll be looking at actually what is a person. We'll be looking at questions such as, are all persons human, the including questions of status. We'll be looking at also non-human animals and machines, and following that, we'll be looking at what secures our personal identity through time.